The grand amphitheater of the Galactic Council buzzed with the distinctive harmonics of 12 different species engaged in what could generously be called diplomatic discourse. Ambassador Thais of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted her crystalline vocal cords to project her melodious laughter across the chamber, her translucent blue skin shimmering with amusement as she reviewed the daily intelligence reports from the Outer Rim territories. "How delegates," Thys announced, her voice carrying the musical quality that had made the Zephyrians natural diplomats. "I present today's entertainment from Sector 7, Alpha." The massive holographic display materialized above the council floor, showing grainy footage of what appeared to be a human mining operation on a barren asteroid. The assembled delegates leaned forward with interest. Entertainment was rare these days, especially the unintentional kind that the newest species seemed to specialize in providing. The humans had been granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council barely 50 standard years ago, making them infants by galactic standards. Most of the other species had been traveling between stars when humanity was still discovering fire. "Observe their technique," continued Thys, highlighting the human miners as they methodically extracted rare minerals using what could only be described as brute force mining equipment. Chemical explosives, mechanical drills, and gravitational manipulators that our ancestors abandoned millennia ago, yet they achieve a 73% efficiency rating. Ambassador Kresh of the Valkyrie hegemony made a sound that his species considered laughter, though it resembled the grinding of metal against stone. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber's artificial lights as he gestured with one of his 4 arms. Primitive, but effective. Like watching younglings discover tools for the first time. "Have you seen their latest attempt at warship construction?" The hologram shifted to display what the humans proudly called their newest generation of space superiority fighters. The assembled delegates erupted in various forms of species-appropriate laughter. The human ships were indeed impressive by human standards, bristling with kinetic weapons, missile systems, and energy shields that would have been cutting-edge technology roughly 2,000 years ago. "Kinetic weapons," wheezed Ambassador Vorth of the crystalline hegemony, her silicon-based form vibrating with mirth. "They actually believe that hurling metal projectiles at relativistic speeds constitutes advanced warfare. What's next? Catapults in space? The entertainment value was undeniable." Humanity had entered the galactic stage with all the subtle grace of a supernova explosion. They approached every problem with a directness that bordered on comical, lacking the sophisticated solutions that more advanced civilizations had developed over millions of years of evolution and technical advancement. "Their diplomatic approaches are even more amusing," added Ambassador Thys, calling up recordings of human negotiators attempting to broker trade agreements. "They actually believe that honesty and straightforward communication are effective diplomatic tools." Watch this exchange with the Murdaxi Traders Consortium. The recording showed a human diplomat, Admiral Sarah Chen, sitting across from a delegation of the notoriously cunning Mordaxi. The tentacled traders were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to craft agreements so complex and layered with hidden clauses that even the most advanced AI systems required weeks to fully comprehend the implications. "We propose a simple exchange," Admiral Chen was saying, her voice steady and confident. "We provide rare earth elements from our mining operations in exchange for advanced computational matrices. Fair market value, no hidden fees, no long-term obligations beyond the specified delivery schedules." The Mordaxi delegation exchanged glances that clearly conveyed their disbelief. In galactic commerce, nothing was ever simple. Every agreement was a web of interconnected obligations, sub-clauses, and carefully crafted loopholes that could be exploited for generations. "She has no idea," whispered one Mordaxi to another, their translation failing to capture the full complexity of their amusement. "They actually mean exactly what they're saying." The council delegates watched as the human admiral continued to outline their proposal with a clarity and honesty that was both refreshing and terrifying in its naivety. She presented technical specifications without hidden modifications, delivery schedules without built-in delays for renegotiation, and quality standards that were actually achievable rather than theoretical maximums designed to trigger penalty clauses. "The Mordaxi signed the agreement," reported Ambassador Thys, her amusement evident. "They were so confused by the straightforward nature of the humans that they agreed to terms that actually favored the humans significantly. The humans fulfilled every obligation exactly as specified, delivered ahead of schedule, and included bonus materials they thought the Mordaxi might find useful." The laughter that followed was not entirely mocking. There was something almost endearing about humanity's approach to galactic politics. They were like earnest children playing complex games, unaware of the subtle rules and hidden strategies that governed interactions between species that had been manipulating each other for longer than human civilization had existed. "Have we received any updates on their military capabilities?" asked Ambassador Kresh, his tone shifting slightly towards something that might have been professional interest. Despite their amusement at human methods, the Velkari were a military species and respected combat effectiveness regardless of its source. "Their fleet composition remains quaint," replied This. "Approximately 230 frontline vessels of various classifications, primarily clustered around their home system and major colonies. Their largest ship's mass roughly 2 million tons, which our analysts classify somewhere between a courier vessel and a light transport by our standards." "Armament?" pressed Kresh. "Primarily kinetic systems with some energy weapons integration. Their most advanced vessels mount what they call plasma cannons that achieve roughly 60% of the efficiency of our standard defensive turrets. Their missile systems are surprisingly sophisticated for their technological level, though they rely on fusion warheads rather than quantum disruption. Shield systems? Electromagnetic barrier generation with some gravitational manipulation. Effective against kinetic attacks and lower energy beam weapons, but vulnerable to phase disruption, temporal displacement, or quantum tunneling techniques. Any of our standard fleet elements could neutralize their entire navy without significant casualties." The assessment was delivered matter-of-factly, without malice or particular pride. It was simply the reality of the technological gap between humanity and the established galactic powers. The humans were not weak exactly, but they were operating with tools and techniques that the other species had surpassed so long ago that detailed records of their use had been relegated to historical archives. "Their ground forces are more interesting," admitted Ambassador Vorth. "Our intelligence suggests they maintain approximately 12 million active military personnel across all branches, with another 50 million in various reserve capacities. Their individual combat effectiveness is surprisingly high." "How so?" asked Ambassador This, genuinely curious. "They train continuously for scenarios that most species would consider impossible. Extended combat operations without resupply, fighting in environments that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes, and tactical flexibility that borders on chaos. Our wargame simulation suggests that while their equipment is inferior, their ability to adapt and improvise is exceptional." "Adaptation born of desperation," observed Kresh. "Their homeworld is remarkably hostile by galactic standards. Extreme weather variations, geological instability, and a biosphere that seems actively hostile to intelligent life. They evolved to survive in conditions that would challenge our most advanced survival equipment." "Which brings us to the most interesting aspect of human military doctrine," continued Vorth, calling up tactical analyses that flickered across the display. "They have developed extensive theoretical frameworks for fighting opponents with superior technology." This drew more serious attention from the assembled delegates. Most galactic species had not needed to consider fighting technologically superior opponents for millions of years. When conflicts arose, they were typically between species of roughly equivalent capability, resolved through political maneuvering or proxy conflicts rather than direct military confrontation. "Their historical records show continuous warfare against superior forces," Vorth continued. "They call it asymmetrical warfare and have refined it to an art form: guerrilla tactics, infrastructure sabotage, resource denial, psychological operations, and what they term unconventional strategies. Theoretical frameworks are irrelevant without the capability to implement them," dismissed Ambassador This, though her tone suggested less certainty than her words implied. "Their fleet assets are insufficient to challenge even our border patrol squadrons." "True," agreed Vorth, "but their doctrine does not assume fleet-to-fleet engagement. Their strategies focus on avoiding direct confrontation while striking at vulnerable infrastructure and supply lines. They have developed extensive planning for scenarios where they lack space superiority entirely." "Paranoid species," observed Kresh. "Their entire military philosophy assumes that someone stronger is trying to destroy them. An interesting perspective from a species that has spent the last 50,000 years as the dominant military power in this sector," remarked Ambassador Vorth dryly. The council chamber fell quiet for a moment as the implications of that observation settled. Most of the established galactic species had indeed not faced existential threats for longer than human recorded history. They had grown comfortable with their technological superiority and established positions within the galactic power structure. "Nonetheless," continued Ambassador This, breaking the silence, "their current capabilities remain limited to their immediate stellar neighborhood." Our intelligence networks report no significant human presence beyond a dozen star systems, all clustered within 50 light-years of their homeworld. They lack the infrastructure for extended military operations, and their logistics systems are primitive by galactic standards. Have they attempted to establish diplomatic relations beyond the Council? Asked Ambassador Kresh. Limited outreach to various independent systems and minor species federations. They seem genuinely interested in trade and cultural exchange rather than political expansion. Their ambassadors are refreshingly straightforward, though this makes them easy to manipulate in complex negotiations. Useful to keep around, mused Worth. A species this direct could serve as effective intermediaries in disputes where all parties have become too sophisticated to communicate honestly. Agreed, said Thys. There's also economic value in their approach to resource extraction and manufacturing. Their efficiency rates in certain industries exceed our own precisely because they haven't learned that such methods are supposedly impossible. The discussion continued for another hour, covering various aspects of human civilization with a detached interest of researchers studying a particularly fascinating specimen. They analyzed human art, which was apparently chaotic but emotionally powerful, human science, which was primitive but demonstrated unusual creativity, and human philosophy, which seemed to place extraordinary value on individual autonomy and collective responsibility simultaneously. As the session concluded, Ambassador Thys filed her routine report with the Council's intelligence services. Humanity remained classified as species of minor interest, with a recommendation to monitor their development for potential economic opportunities and diplomatic utility. Their military capabilities were assessed as negligible beyond local defensive operations, and their political influence as limited to symbolic participation in Council proceedings. The report would be distributed to appropriate departments throughout the Galactic Intelligence Network, filed in databases that tracked hundreds of similar species, and largely forgotten until the next routine review cycle. What none of the delegates noticed was the small notation at the bottom of the intelligence summary, indicating that 3 separate monitoring stations in human space had missed their scheduled check-ins over the past month. The automated systems flagged this as a low-priority anomaly, possibly indicating equipment failures or communication interference from solar activity. Had they investigated further, they might have discovered that the monitoring stations hadn't failed at all. They had simply disappeared, along with their crews, their automated sensor networks, and any record of what had happened to them. But the Galactic Council was too busy being entertained by humanity's charming naivety to notice the growing patches of darkness spreading through the star charts like ink through water. They were too amused by human directness to recognize that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who tell you exactly what they're going to do. And they were too confident in their technological superiority to understand that evolution never stops, especially when the survival of an entire species depends on learning to hunt in the spaces between the light. Commander Jarek Voss floated in the observation bubble of Research Station Omega 7, watching the binary stars of the Kepler AA442 system paint shifting patterns of light across the metallic hull of his vessel. The station represented the cutting edge of Zephyrian deep space monitoring technology, its crystalline sensor arrays capable of detecting quantum fluctuations across half the galaxy. As the senior intelligence officer for this sector, Voss took pride in maintaining the most comprehensive surveillance network in known space. His 3-month rotation was nearly complete, and the duty had been blissfully routine. The automated systems monitored the usual traffic of merchant vessels, diplomatic couriers, and the occasional explorer vessel pushing into uncharted territories. The biggest excitement had been tracking a pod of quantum whales through local space, their massive forms rippling through dimensions as they fed on stellar radiation. "Commander," came the melodic voice of his communications officer, Lieutenant Thynol, "we're receiving an anomalous reading from Grid Sector 7. Voss adjusted his position in the zero-gravity observation chamber, his translucent skin shifting to accommodate the change in blood flow. Define anomalous, Lieutenant. Mass displacement signatures consistent with a large vessel, but no corresponding electromagnetic or quantum signatures. The gravitational sensors are detecting something, but everything else shows empty space. Instrument malfunction? That was my first assumption, but I've run full diagnostics twice. All systems are functioning within normal parameters. The readings are consistent across multiple sensor arrays. Voss felt the first stirring of genuine interest he'd experienced in weeks. Space was vast and mostly empty, but it was very rarely mysterious. Galactic civilization had mapped and cataloged virtually every phenomenon in known space over millions of years of exploration. True anomalies were extraordinarily rare. "Display the data," he ordered, propelling himself toward the main control center. The holographic display materialized between them, showing a 3-dimensional representation of local space. Grid Sector 7 appeared as a vast emptiness punctuated by the occasional asteroid or debris field. But there, hanging in the void like a ghost, was an irregular mass displacement, approximately 2 kilometers in length. "How long has it been there?" asked Voss. "That's the strange part," replied Thynel. "I only noticed it 20 minutes ago, but when I backtracked through the sensor logs, it appears to have been there for at least 6 hours. Possibly longer. 6 hours. Why didn't the automated systems flag it?" "Because it's not really there," said Thynel, her confusion evident in the shifting harmonics of her voice. "According to every sensor except gravimetric, that section of space is completely empty. No energy signatures, no matter displacement, no quantum field disturbance. Just a gravitational shadow where nothing should exist." Voss studied the display with growing unease. In his 40 years of deep space service, he had never encountered anything that could selectively fool the majority of their sensor systems, while remaining visible to others. Even the most advanced stealth technology left some trace signatures that could be detected if you knew what to look for. "Have you attempted active scanning?" "I was waiting for your authorization. Active scans would reveal our position to anyone monitoring electromagnetic frequencies." "Do it," ordered Voss. "If there's something out there using technology we don't recognize, I want to know about it." Lieutenant Thynel activated the station's primary sensor array, sending focused beams of quantum-entangled particles toward the anomalous reading. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the gravitational shadow simply vanished. "Where did it go?" demanded Voss. "Unknown. One moment it was there, the next moment it wasn't. No acceleration signatures, no dimensional folding, no quantum tunnel formation. It just stopped existing." "That's impossible." "Yes, sir. But the sensor logs confirm it." Voss floated in silence for several minutes, processing the implications. Either their most advanced monitoring equipment was malfunctioning in ways that defied understanding, or something was operating in their surveillance zone using technology that surpassed anything in their databases. "Lieutenant, I want you to expand the search pattern. Full spectrum analysis of everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. If there's something out there playing games with our sensors, I want to know what it is and where it came from." "Understood. Should I alert Central Command?" "Not yet. Let's gather more data before we file a report that makes us sound like we're hallucinating." Over the next 4 hours, Lieutenant Thynel conducted the most comprehensive sensor sweep in the station's operational history. She detected the usual background radiation, several small asteroids, a debris field from an ancient battle, and the fading quantum signature of a merchant vessel that had passed through 3 days earlier. What she didn't detect was any evidence that the gravitational anomaly had ever existed. "Commander," she reported, "I've found something interesting in the historical logs." "Show me." The holographic display shifted to show sensor data from the past month, compressed into a time-lapse format. As Voss watched, small gravitational anomalies appeared and disappeared throughout their surveillance zone, never lasting more than a few hours, never following predictable patterns. "How many?" he asked. 17 confirmed instances over the past 30 days, possibly more that lasted too briefly for our sensors to register. They appear to be systematically surveying our entire operational area. Surveying for what? Unknown. But the pattern suggests intelligence rather than natural phenomenon. Whatever is creating these signatures is methodical and purposeful. Voss felt his skin temperature drop as the implications became clear. Something was watching them, studying their capabilities and monitoring their activities with technology that their most advanced sensors could barely detect. And it had been doing so for at least a month without their knowledge. "Have you detected similar anomalies in neighboring sectors?" "I attempted to access adjacent monitoring stations for comparison data, but I am experiencing communication difficulties." "What kind of difficulties?" "Station Omega, 6 and Station Omega. 8 are not responding to standard communication protocols. Their automated data feeds went silent approximately 18 hours ago." Voss felt the first cold touch of genuine alarm. 2 adjacent monitoring stations going offline simultaneously was far beyond the realm of coincidence, especially given the mysterious gravitational signatures they had been tracking. "Prepare an emergency communication burst to Central Command," he ordered. "Full priority encryption." "Sir, emergency communications protocols require..." The station's main power systems went offline without warning, plunging the command center into darkness. Emergency lighting activated moments later, bathing everything in a dim red glow that made shadows dance across the walls. The usual background hum of environmental systems fell silent, replaced by the emergency power generators. Report, snapped Voss, though his voice betrayed none of the fear that was building in his chest. Unknown. All primary systems have gone offline simultaneously. Emergency power is functioning, but main reactor shows no signs of malfunction. It's as if someone simply turned off the power. External sensors? Offline. Internal sensors are functioning on backup power, but I can't see anything outside the station. Communications? Offline. Voss pushed himself toward the emergency equipment locker, retrieving a portable scanner unit. The device was primitive compared to the station's main sensor arrays, but it was designed to function independently of the station's primary systems. Commander, said Thynol, her voice tight with controlled panic, the gravitational sensors are detecting multiple large masses surrounding the station. How many? At least 12. Possibly more. They're maintaining position approximately 5 kilometers out in all directions. Voss activated the portable scanner and immediately understood why their sensors had been detecting gravitational anomalies without corresponding energy signatures. The objects surrounding their station were absorbing or deflecting virtually every form of electromagnetic radiation, creating perfect shadows against the background of space. What are they? Whispered Thynol. Before Voss could answer, the station's communication system crackled to life. The voice that emerged was distinctly human, speaking in the direct, unadorned style that had become familiar from diplomatic recordings. Research Station Omega 7. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Phantom. We apologize for the dramatic approach, but we need to talk. Voss and Thynol exchanged glances. The humans were supposed to be confined to their local star systems, limited by primitive technology and small fleet assets. The idea that they could appear undetected in the heart of Zephyrian space was beyond impossible. This is Commander Voss, he replied, activating the communication system. Captain Chen, you are in violation of multiple territorial agreements and galactic navigation protocols. Explain your presence immediately. I understand your concern, Commander. We're not here to threaten you or your facility. We're here to offer you a choice. What kind of choice? You can file a report with your superiors describing an unusual sensor malfunction that lasted approximately 6 hours. Your equipment will function normally for the remainder of your rotation, and you'll return to your homeworld with an excellent service record. Or you can file a report describing 12 unidentified vessels that somehow penetrated the heart of Zephyrian space without being detected by any of your surveillance networks. You can explain how these vessels disabled your station without damaging any critical systems and demonstrated technology that shouldn't exist. You can watch your career end as your superiors decide you've suffered some kind of psychological breakdown. The brutal simplicity of the choice was distinctly human. No complex negotiations, no layers of hidden meaning, just a straightforward presentation of options and consequences. You're threatening us, said Voss. No, Commander. I'm offering you the opportunity to preserve your career and your life. What I'm threatening is the illusion that humanity is harmless. The Galactic Council will never believe that humans have developed stealth technology capable of penetrating our sensor networks. You're absolutely right, agreed Captain Chen. Which is why we've been very careful to ensure that our activities remain invisible to your intelligence networks. Your station isn't the first facility we've visited, Commander. Over the past 6 months, we've conducted similar operations at 47 monitoring posts, research stations, and military installations throughout Zephyrian space. Impossible. Your colleagues at Stations Omega, 6 and Omega 8 made similar choices approximately 18 hours ago. They decided to report sensor malfunctions rather than impossible encounters with primitive human technology. Wise decisions, in my opinion. The communication fell silent for several minutes as Voss processed the implications. If Captain Chen was telling the truth, then humanity had been conducting systematic intelligence operations throughout Zephyrian space for months without being detected. More importantly, they had demonstrated the capability to neutralize advanced monitoring stations without triggering any of the automated warning systems that should have alerted Central Command. What do you want? He finally asked. Information. Specifically, we want access to your intelligence databases regarding Velkari hegemony fleet movements and Arcturian Confederacy diplomatic activities. That information is classified at levels far above my authorization. We know. We also know that you have access to emergency override protocols that would allow you to retrieve the data under specific circumstances. How could you possibly know about emergency protocols? Because we've been watching, Commander. We've been learning. And we've discovered that the galaxy is a much more interesting place than anyone told us. Voss realized that he was experiencing something that no Zephyrian had faced in living memory, being outmaneuvered by a supposedly inferior species. The humans had somehow developed capabilities that exceeded their own while maintaining the appearance of harmless primitives. More disturbing, they had been using those capabilities to conduct intelligence operations that violated every treaty and territorial agreement in known space. If I provide this information, what guarantee do I have that you won't use it against Zephyrian interests? None whatsoever, replied Captain Chen with brutal honesty. But if it makes you feel better, our current objectives don't involve the Zephyrian Empire. You've been remarkably reasonable neighbors, all things considered.
And the other species?
That depends on their choices. We're hoping they'll be as reasonable as you're about to be. The implicit threat was clear. Humanity had developed the capability to operate throughout galactic space without detection, and they were prepared to use that capability against anyone who threatened their interests. The question was whether the established galactic powers would recognize the new reality before they forced humanity to demonstrate their capabilities more directly. The data you're requesting could destabilize the entire sector, said Voss. The sector is already unstable, Commander. We're just trying to make sure that when things fall apart, humanity isn't caught in the collapse. You're planning for war. We're planning for survival. Experience has taught us that there is often a significant overlap between the two. Voss made his decision. Whether from wisdom or cowardice, he would never be entirely certain, but the mathematics of the situation were clear. He could file a report that would end his career and potentially destabilize galactic politics, or he could preserve the status quo while acknowledging that humanity was no longer the harmless curiosity that everyone assumed them to be. I'll need approximately 1 hour to access the requested databases. We're not going anywhere. As Voss began the complex process of accessing classified intelligence files, he wondered if history would remember this moment as the beginning of humanity's rise or the end of galactic peace. What he didn't realize was that both assessments would prove to be accurate. In the shadows surrounding Research Station Omega, 12 vessels that shouldn't have existed maintained their positions with the patience of apex predators. Their crews monitored every communication frequency, analyzed every energy emission, and prepared for contingencies that their training had taught them to expect. Humanity had learned to hunt in the dark between the stars, and the galaxy was about to discover what that meant. Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez stood before the massive holographic display in the Strategic Operations Center, watching as red icons appeared across a three-dimensional map of known space. Each icon represented a successful intelligence-gathering operation, a monitoring station compromised, or a fleet position analyzed. Over the past 8 months, Operation Silent Hunter had expanded far beyond its original scope, evolving from a simple reconnaissance mission into the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering effort in human history. Status report, Colonel Martinez, she ordered, her voice carrying the authority that came from 30 years of military service and the weight of humanity's future resting on her decisions. Colonel Miguel Martinez manipulated the holographic controls, highlighting different sectors of the display. Phase 1 operations are 93% complete across all target zones. We have successfully infiltrated surveillance networks in Zephyrian, Valkyrie, Arcturian, and Mordaxi space. Intelligence-gathering operations are ongoing in 12 additional species territories. Casualties? 0 personnel losses, Admiral. 3 vessels experienced minor technical difficulties that required early return to base, but all crews are healthy and equipment has been repaired. Detection incidents? 17 confirmed contacts with monitoring station personnel, all resolved through negotiation rather than force. Local commanders have consistently chosen to report equipment malfunctions rather than impossible encounters with human stealth vessels. Admiral Vasquez nodded approvingly. The psychological profiles that Dr. Sarah Chen's diplomatic corps had developed for each species had proven remarkably accurate. When faced with evidence that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about human capabilities, most individuals chose to preserve their worldview rather than challenge the established order. What about Phase 2 preparations? Colonel Martinez highlighted a different section of the display, showing detailed fleet compositions and movement patterns throughout the galaxy. Intelligence analysis is complete for primary targets. We have comprehensive data on fleet strengths, deployment patterns, logistical networks, communication protocols, and strategic doctrines for all major galactic powers. Vulnerabilities? Extensive. Every species we've surveyed shows critical weaknesses that could be exploited in potential conflict scenarios. Their technological superiority has made them complacent, Admiral. They've forgotten how to fight wars. Elaborate. Take the Valkyrie hegemony as an example. They maintain the largest military fleet in known space, with approximately 8,000 vessels of various classifications. Impressive numbers, but their doctrine assumes technological dominance over any potential opponent. They position their fleets in defensive formations around major population centers and trade routes, optimized for deterrence rather than active combat operations. Which means their supply lines are extended and poorly defended. Their command and control systems rely on quantum communication networks that we can now disrupt. Their fleet elements are designed for overwhelming firepower rather than tactical flexibility, making them vulnerable to asymmetrical attack strategies. Admiral Vasquez studied the tactical assessments scrolling across secondary displays. The data painted a picture of galactic civilization that was simultaneously impressive and fragile. Over millions of years of technological advancement, the major species had created military systems of incredible sophistication, but they had also created vulnerabilities that more primitive opponents could exploit. The Arcturian Confederacy is even worse, continued Martinez. Their entire strategic doctrine is based on economic warfare and political manipulation rather than direct military confrontation. They have the industrial capacity to produce massive fleets, but their actual military assets are primarily designed for police actions and diplomatic intimidation. And the Zephyrians? Technologically advanced but overconfident. Their surveillance networks are comprehensive within their own territory, but they have no experience operating in contested environments. Their vessels are fast and well-armed, but their crews have no experience with actual combat operations. None of them have fought real wars recently. The last major interspecies conflict ended over 50,000 years ago, Admiral. Since then, disputes have been resolved through economic pressure, political maneuvering, or proxy conflicts involving smaller species. The major powers haven't directly engaged each other in living memory. Admiral Vasquez considered the implications. Humanity had stumbled into a galaxy where the dominant powers had forgotten the fundamental realities of warfare. They possessed weapons of incredible destructive potential, but they had lost the institutional knowledge of how to use them effectively against determined opposition. What about their intelligence capabilities? Limited and predictable. Each species maintains extensive surveillance networks within their own territories, but they have minimal capability for deep reconnaissance in contested space. Their intelligence gathering relies heavily on diplomatic sources, commercial data networks, and automated monitoring stations that we've learned to avoid or neutralize. Do they coordinate their intelligence efforts? Minimally. The Galactic Council maintains a shared database of general threat assessments, but each species guards their operational intelligence closely. They're more concerned with gaining advantages over each other than with identifying potential threats from outside the established power structure. Which means they don't know about our capabilities. Correct. As far as their intelligence networks are concerned, humanity remains a minor species with limited fleet assets and primitive technology. Our stealth operations have been invisible to their surveillance systems, and the few individuals who have encountered our vessels have consistently chosen to maintain the illusion rather than challenge it. Admiral Vasquez moved to another section of the display, examining detailed schematics of various alien technologies that human intelligence teams had observed or analyzed. The technological gap between humanity and the galactic powers remained significant, but it was not insurmountable. More importantly, humanity had developed capabilities that the other species had never needed to consider. Dr. Chen, what's your assessment of our technological development program? Dr. Sarah Chen materialized via hologram from the research facility on Mars, her image flickering slightly as the quantum communication link stabilized. As the head of the reverse engineering division, she had been responsible for analyzing and adapting alien technologies that human intelligence teams had encountered during their operations. Remarkable progress, Admiral. We've successfully reverse engineered 17 different alien technologies and adapted them for human use. Our stealth systems now incorporate Zephyrian quantum field manipulation, Velkari electromagnetic absorption, and Arcturian sensor deflection techniques. Combat applications? Our weapon systems remain inferior to alien equivalents in terms of raw power, but we've developed delivery systems that their defenses weren't designed to counter. Our new torpedo systems use Mordaxi dimensional folding technology to bypass conventional shield systems entirely. Time to deployment? The first batch of upgraded vessels should be ready for operational testing within 6 weeks. Full fleet integration will require approximately 8 months, assuming no major technical difficulties. Admiral Vasquez nodded. The timeline was acceptable, especially given the complexity of integrating multiple alien technologies into human systems. More importantly, humanity would soon possess capabilities that no galactic power would expect them to have. Colonel, what's our current assessment of galactic political stability? Martinez highlighted different sections of the galactic map showing political boundaries and alliance structures. Increasingly fragile. Our intelligence suggests that several major tensions are approaching crisis points. Explain. The Velkari hegemony is experiencing internal pressure from several member species that want greater autonomy. The Arcturian Confederacy is facing economic challenges that could force them to become more aggressive in their trade practices. The Zephyrian Empire has been expanding into territories claimed by smaller species, creating potential flashpoints for conflict. How long before something breaks? Our analysts estimate between 18 months and 3 years before a major crisis forces the established powers to choose between accommodation and conflict. And humanity's position? Precarious? We're still classified as a minor species with minimal political influence. When the crisis comes, no one will ask for our opinion or consider our interests. We'll be expected to accept whatever arrangements the major powers negotiate. Admiral Vasquez understood the strategic situation perfectly. Humanity had gained tremendous intelligence advantages and was rapidly developing technological capabilities that could level the playing field with established galactic powers. But they were still operating from a position of perceived weakness, which could become a fatal liability if galactic politics collapsed into open conflict. What about Phase 3 preparations? Operational planning is complete for all potential scenarios, replied Martinez. We have contingency plans for limited conflict, sector-wide war, and total galactic destabilization. Our target prioritization focuses on neutralizing enemy intelligence capabilities, disrupting command and control systems, and eliminating strategic assets that could threaten human territories. Force requirements: minimal for Phase 3 Alpha scenarios involving isolated conflicts with single species, moderate for Phase 3 Beta scenarios involving alliance systems, extensive for Phase 3 Gamma scenarios involving full galactic war. Define extensive. Complete mobilization of human military resources, activation of all reserve forces, and implementation of emergency industrial protocols. Estimated duration could range from months to decades depending on enemy response and alliance patterns. The soberness of the assessment settled over the command center like a heavy blanket. Despite humanity's intelligence advantages and developing technological capabilities, they remained vastly outnumbered by the established galactic powers. Any major conflict would require careful planning, perfect execution, and considerable luck to avoid human extinction. Dr. Chen, what's your opinion on our chances? In a direct confrontation using conventional tactics? Negligible. But if we can maintain our intelligence advantages and continue operating from the shadows, our odds improve dramatically. The key is to avoid being drawn into the kind of warfare that plays to their strengths, which means we need to redefine the battlefield. Instead of fleet-to-fleet engagements, we focus on infrastructure disruption. Instead of territorial conquest, we target command and control systems. Instead of occupation, we create chaos that forces our enemies to expend their resources fighting each other rather than us. Admiral Vasquez studied the strategic projections flowing across the display. Dr. Chen's assessment aligned with humanity's historical approach to warfare against superior opponents. They had always been most effective when they avoided direct confrontation and focused on undermining enemy capabilities through unconventional means. Colonel, I want Phase 3 operational plans updated to incorporate maximum utilization of our stealth capabilities. We're not going to fight this war like they expect us to. Understood, Admiral. Should we begin accelerated training programs for expanded stealth operations? Yes. And I want contingency plans for rapid expansion of our intelligence-gathering network. If we're going into this conflict, I want to know everything about our enemies before they even know there's a war happening. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, covering logistical requirements, technological development priorities, and political considerations that would affect humanity's strategic position. As the senior staff dispersed to implement the Admiral's directives, one crucial fact remained unspoken but understood by everyone present. Humanity was no longer the naive species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage 50 years earlier. They had learned to hunt in the darkness between stars, and they were preparing to demonstrate that evolutionary adaptation in ways that the galaxy was entirely unprepared for. In monitoring stations throughout known space, automated systems continued to report routine activities and normal operations. What they didn't report were the shadows that moved between the light, the questions that were never asked, or the growing realization that the galaxy's greatest joke was about to become its most dangerous predator. The network was awakening, and the universe would never be the same. The crisis began, as most galactic catastrophes do, with a seemingly minor trade dispute that spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control. The Mordaxi Traders Consortium had been systematically manipulating shipping routes through the Kepler Nexus, forcing independent merchants to pay increasingly exorbitant fees for passage through what had traditionally been free trade corridors. When the Arcturian Confederacy moved to protect their commercial interests by establishing a military presence in the disputed region, the Valkyrie hegemony interpreted this as an act of territorial aggression. Ambassador Thys watched the emergency session of the Galactic Council with growing alarm. What had started as a routine commercial arbitration had devolved into threats, ultimatums, and military posturing that reminded her uncomfortably of historical records from the galaxy's last major war. The assembled delegates had abandoned their usual diplomatic courtesy in favor of increasingly aggressive rhetoric that suggested rational negotiation was no longer possible. The Arcturian incursion into sovereign Valkyrie space represents an unacceptable violation of established territorial agreements, declared Ambassador Kresh, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with agitation. The hegemony demands immediate withdrawal of all Confederacy vessels, or we will consider this an act of war. The Confederacy recognizes no Valkyrie territorial claims in the Kepler Nexus, replied Ambassador Vorth of the Arcturian Confederacy, her silicon-based form vibrating with controlled anger. These shipping lanes have been neutral territory for over 10,000 years, and we will not allow criminal organizations to extort legitimate merchants under the protection of Valkyrie military threats. Criminal organizations, echoed Kresh, his forearms gesturing in patterns that conveyed extreme offense. The Mordaxi Traders Consortium operates under legal charters issued by the hegemony government. Your accusations constitute diplomatic slander of the highest order. Your legal charters are worthless outside Valkyrie space, retorted Vorth. And your protection of criminal enterprises demonstrates the moral bankruptcy of your entire governmental system. Ambassador Thys attempted to interject with a proposal for mediated arbitration, but her voice was drowned out by the escalating accusations flying between the two major powers. Around the chamber, representatives of smaller species watched with barely concealed terror as the foundation of galactic civilization cracked before their eyes. "Esteemed colleagues," called a new voice from the human delegation section, drawing surprised attention from the arguing parties, "if I may suggest a potential solution that addresses the concerns of all parties involved." Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the human delegation's podium, her appearance as straightforward and unassuming as ever. She wore the simple blue uniform of the Human Diplomatic Corps, devoid of the elaborate decorations and status symbols favored by other species. Her voice carried the same direct, honest tone that had made humans either endearing or irritating depending on one's perspective. The human delegation recognizes the legitimacy of both Valkyrie territorial sovereignty and Arcturian commercial rights, she continued. We propose establishing a joint administration zone in the Kepler Nexus, managed by neutral parties under Council supervision, with shipping fees regulated to prevent exploitation while providing reasonable compensation for navigation services. The suggestion was so fundamentally reasonable that both Ambassador Kresh and Ambassador Vorth found themselves momentarily at a loss for words. In the heat of escalating rhetoric, neither had considered solutions that addressed their stated concerns rather than their underlying territorial ambitions. An interesting proposal, admitted Ambassador Vorth, her tone cautiously receptive. However, the implementation details would require extensive negotiation to address security concerns and enforcement mechanisms. Indeed, agreed Ambassador Kresh, though his body language suggested reluctance to appear conciliatory. The hegemony would need substantial guarantees regarding the neutrality and competence of any joint administration. However, given the complexity of such negotiations, perhaps it would be appropriate to establish a temporary ceasefire while detailed discussions proceed. Military deployments could be frozen at current levels to prevent further escalation while diplomatic solutions are explored. What followed was 3 hours of the most productive diplomatic discussion the Galactic Council had seen in decades. Admiral Chen displayed an almost supernatural ability to identify compromise positions that addressed the core interests of both parties while avoiding the pride-damaging concessions that had made previous negotiations impossible. Her proposals were elegantly simple, refreshingly honest, and completely focused on practical solutions rather than political posturing. By the end of the session, both the Valkyrie hegemony and the Arcturian Confederacy had agreed to a temporary ceasefire, a joint fact-finding mission to assess the situation in the Kepler Nexus, and preliminary negotiations toward a comprehensive resolution of the underlying territorial and commercial disputes. The crisis that had threatened to destabilize the entire galaxy appeared to be diffusing through the application of basic diplomatic competence. Remarkable, observed Ambassador Thys as the session concluded. I've never seen such effective crisis management from any delegation, let alone from a species of such limited diplomatic experience. The humans have surprised us all today, agreed Ambassador Vorth. Perhaps we have underestimated their potential contributions to galactic stability. What none of the delegates realized was that Admiral Chen's diplomatic success had been facilitated by intelligence that no human should have possessed. Her proposals had been crafted with precise knowledge of each party's real interests, secret negotiating positions, and hidden vulnerabilities gathered through months of systematic surveillance operations. She knew exactly what compromises each side could accept because human intelligence teams had been monitoring their private communications for over a year. More importantly, Admiral Chen's diplomatic intervention had achieved its primary objective, establishing a justification for increased human involvement in galactic affairs. The temporary ceasefire would provide cover for the next phase of human operations, when humanity would demonstrate that their technological capabilities had evolved far beyond anyone's expectations. 12 hours after the council session ended, the first phase of Operation Shadowfall commenced in the outer regions of Valkyrie space. The VHS Dominion, a massive hegemony battlecruiser assigned to patrol the disputed border regions, was conducting routine surveillance operations when its sensor arrays detected an impossible gravitational anomaly. Fleet Command, this is Captain Thorick aboard the Dominion. We have an unidentified contact at bearing 127 Mark 34. Mass signature indicates a vessel of approximately 1 million tons, but we're not reading any propulsion signatures or energy emissions. Dominion, this is Fleet Command. Investigate and report. Be advised that all Arcturian vessels should be maintaining positions per ceasefire agreements. Acknowledge, Fleet Command. Moving to investigate. The Dominion was a testament to Valkyrie military engineering, mounting enough firepower to sterilize a planet and protected by shield systems that could deflect the energy output of a small star. Its crew of 3,000 warriors had trained for decades in ship-to-ship combat, though none had ever experienced actual warfare. They approached the anomalous contact with professional confidence and complete certainty in their technological superiority. Contact distance is now 5,000 kilometers in closing, reported the sensor operator. Still no energy signatures, but gravitational readings are consistent with a solid mass object. Visual confirmation? Nothing, sir. Whatever it is appears to be invisible across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Captain Thor considered his options. The ceasefire agreements prohibited aggressive action against unidentified vessels, but he had a responsibility to investigate potential threats to hegemony territory. After a moment of deliberation, he chose a middle course of action: signal the contact on all standard frequencies. If they're out there, they need to identify themselves. Unknown vessel. This is the VHS Dominion of the Valkyrie Hegemony Space Forces. You are operating in sovereign hegemony space without authorization. Identify yourself immediately or prepare to be boarded for inspection. The response came immediately, transmitted on a frequency that their communication system shouldn't have been able to receive. VHS Dominion, this is Captain Rodriguez of the Earth vessel Nightshade. We are conducting routine navigation exercises in international space under the authority of the Galactic Council's Resolution 2847 regarding freedom of navigation. Captain Thorick felt his confidence waver. Resolution 2847 did indeed guarantee navigation rights throughout disputed territories, but no human vessel should have been capable of reaching this region undetected. Their intelligence briefings indicated that humanity's fastest ships required weeks to travel distances that Valkyrie vessels covered in hours. Captain Rodriguez, our records show no filed flight plans for human vessels in this sector. Explain your presence and your ship's unusual sensor signature. Our flight plan was filed with the appropriate authorities 12 hours ago, Captain. As for our sensor signature, we're testing new stealth systems developed by our engineering corps. I'm sure you understand the need for operational security regarding new military technologies. Stealth systems? The human delegation has never declared development of advanced military technologies. The human delegation has never been asked about our military capabilities, Captain. We prefer not to discuss such matters unless directly relevant to diplomatic negotiations. Captain Thorick realized that he was facing a situation entirely outside his experience. The humans were supposed to be primitive and harmless, confined to their local star systems by technological limitations and small fleet assets. The idea that they could develop stealth technology advanced enough to fool Valkyrie sensors was beyond impossible. Captain Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to shut down your stealth systems and submit to inspection of your vessel. I'm afraid I can't comply with that order, Captain. Human vessels operate under the authority of Earth Command, and we don't recognize Valkyrie jurisdiction over neutral space. This is sovereign hegemony territory. According to human navigation charts, we are currently located in disputed space subject to the territorial claims of 17 different species. Valkyrie sovereignty is not universally recognized in this region. You will submit to inspection, or I will consider your presence an act of war. Captain, I strongly advise against any aggressive action. Our orders authorize appropriate response to hostile activity, and our capabilities may exceed your current understanding. The warning was delivered in the same straightforward, matter-of-fact tone that characterized all human communications. There was no bluster, no theatrical threats, just a simple statement of fact that somehow carried more menace than all the elaborate intimidation tactics in Valkyrie military doctrine. You're threatening a hegemony battlecruiser with a single ship? Your vessel masses less than our escort fighters? Mass isn't everything, Captain. Would you like a demonstration? Before Captain Thorick could respond, the Dominion's main weapon system simply stopped functioning. Not damaged, not overloaded, not disabled by enemy action, they simply turned off as if someone had flipped a switch. Shield generators went offline, propulsion systems lost power, and communication arrays fell silent. Within 60 seconds, one of the most advanced warships in known space had been reduced to a powerless hulk drifting in the void. How? Demanded Captain Thorick, though he wasn't entirely sure who he was asking. Electromagnetic pulse weapons, quantum field disruptors, and computer virus infiltration, came Captain Rodriguez's voice through the emergency communication system. Your ship's systems are designed to resist damage, but not to prevent unauthorized shutdown commands transmitted through your own communication networks. Our communication networks are protected by quantum encryption. They are indeed. Excellent encryption, though somewhat predictable once you understand the mathematical principles involved. We've been monitoring your communication protocols for several months now. The implications crashed over Captain Thorick like a wave of ice water. The humans hadn't just developed stealth technology. They had somehow cracked Valkyrie encryption systems and gained the ability to disable their most advanced warships without firing a shot. What do you want? Nothing dramatic, Captain. We're simply demonstrating that galactic politics have become more complex than anyone realized. Your ship's systems will return to normal operation in approximately 1 hour. I suggest you report this incident as a technical malfunction caused by gravitational interference from the local star cluster. You expect me to lie to Fleet Command? I expect you to make the choice that best serves the interests of your crew, your career, and galactic peace. The truth is that humanity is no longer the harmless primitive species that everyone assumes us to be. We have capabilities that would fundamentally alter the balance of power if they became widely known. Are you threatening the hegemony? No, Captain. We're offering the hegemony the opportunity to adapt to new realities before those realities become public knowledge. Admiral Chen's diplomatic efforts have opened a pathway toward peaceful resolution of current crises. It would be unfortunate if military incidents forced us to explore less diplomatic alternatives. Captain Thorak sat in the darkness of his disabled command center, processing the most significant intelligence revelation in hegemony history. Humanity had somehow evolved from harmless primitives to a potential galactic superpower without anyone noticing. They possessed stealth technology that rendered their vessels invisible to the most advanced sensors, cyber warfare capabilities that could disable any ship in space, and intelligence networks that had apparently been monitoring galactic powers for months or years. More disturbing, they had demonstrated these capabilities not through aggressive action but through surgical precision that suggested extraordinary tactical sophistication. They could have destroyed the Dominion easily, but instead they had chosen to deliver a message that was impossible to ignore while providing a face-saving explanation that would prevent immediate military escalation. Captain Rodriguez, if I file this report as you suggest, what assurance do I have that similar incidents won't occur throughout hegemony space? You have my word, Captain, that human vessels will avoid hegemony space unless invited. Our current operations are focused on gathering information and preventing galactic conflicts that could threaten human interests. We have no territorial ambitions in your region. And if conflicts do develop despite your diplomatic efforts, then we will protect our interests using whatever means prove necessary. But we would much prefer to resolve disputes through negotiation rather than demonstration of our military capabilities. The choice once again was brutally simple in the human style. Captain Thorak could report the truth and watch galactic civilization collapse into paranoid chaos as every species realized that humanity possessed capabilities that could threaten anyone, anywhere, at any time. Or he could accept the fiction of a technical malfunction and hope that human promises of peaceful intent proved reliable. 1 hour, you said? Approximately 53 minutes remaining, Captain. Your crew has performed admirably under unusual circumstances. You should be proud of their discipline. When the Dominion systems returned to normal operation, Captain Thorak filed a routine incident report describing a temporary power failure caused by gravitational fluctuations from a nearby pulsar. The report was accepted without question by Fleet Command and filed in the routine maintenance database. What Captain Thorick didn't report was the growing conviction that humanity had quietly become the most dangerous species in known space, and that the galaxy's entire political structure was built on assumptions that were no longer true. In the shadows between the stars, 12 human vessels observed the resolution of the first test of their new capabilities. Operation Shadowfall had achieved its objectives with perfect precision, demonstrating humanity's technological advancement while providing justification for their growing involvement in galactic affairs. The prey had indeed become the predator, and the universe was beginning to understand what that meant. 6 months after the Kepler Nexus crisis, the Galactic Council convened for what would later be remembered as the most significant session in over 50,000 years of galactic civilization. The emergency meeting had been called following a series of incidents that had shattered every assumption about the balance of power in known space. The Arcturian Confederacy had lost 3 major fleet installations to what their investigators could only describe as impossible technical failures. The Velkari hegemony had discovered that their supposedly secure communication networks had been compromised for over a year. The Zephyrian Empire's most advanced surveillance systems had detected gravitational anomalies that suggested the presence of massive fleets where their sensors showed only empty space. Most disturbing of all, the Mordoxi Traders Consortium had simply vanished. Their entire commercial network, including over 400 vessels and 24 space stations, had disappeared overnight, without any distress signals, debris fields, or evidence of what had happened to them. Ambassador Thies took her position at the Zephyrian delegation's podium with hands that trembled slightly despite her efforts at diplomatic composure. The intelligence briefings she had received over the past week had painted a picture of galactic reality that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the universe. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, her melodious voice carrying across the chamber with its usual clarity, "we gather today to address revelations that challenge the fundamental assumptions upon which our civilization has been built. The evidence suggests that we are not alone in developing advanced military capabilities, and that the balance of power we have taken for granted may no longer exist." The chamber fell silent. Representatives from hundreds of species focused their attention on the speaker, though many had already received preliminary briefings that prepared them for the shocking revelations to come. Over the past 6 months, our combined intelligence services have documented technological capabilities that exceed our understanding of what should be possible. Ships that can travel undetected through the most heavily monitored space in the galaxy. Computer systems that can penetrate quantum encryption protocols that have been considered unbreakable for millennia. Weapon systems that can disable our most advanced vessels without leaving any trace of how the attack was conducted. Ambassador Kresh of the Velkari hegemony rose from his position, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming with agitation. Ambassador Thiss speaks correctly. The hegemony has conducted extensive investigations into recent incidents involving our fleet assets. We have discovered that our communication networks, sensor systems, and even our most secure military installations have been under surveillance by an unknown party for at least 18 months. The Confederacy has reached similar conclusions, added Ambassador Vorth, her silicon-based form vibrating with controlled tension. Our technical analysis indicates that the responsible party possesses technological capabilities that our scientists considered theoretically impossible. More disturbing, they have demonstrated the ability to operate throughout our territory without detection by any of our monitoring systems. A murmur of concern rippled through the chamber as delegates from smaller species realized that if the major galactic powers could be infiltrated so thoroughly, their own territories were completely vulnerable to whoever possessed these capabilities. "Do we know who is responsible?" called out Ambassador Zarek of the Crystalline Hegemony. Ambassador Thiss exchanged glances with her counterparts from the other major powers. The answer to that question was the reason for this emergency session, and it would fundamentally alter galactic politics in ways that none of them were prepared for. "Based on our combined intelligence analysis," she replied carefully, "we believe the responsible party is humanity." The silence that followed was profound. For several long seconds, no one spoke as delegates processed the implications of what they had just heard. The humans, who had been the subject of gentle mockery for decades, were apparently responsible for the most sophisticated intelligence operations in galactic history. "That's impossible," declared Ambassador Zarek. "Human technology is primitive by our standards. Their fleet consists of a few hundred small vessels with capabilities that our warships surpassed millennia ago." "Our intelligence suggests otherwise," replied Ambassador Kresh. "We have confirmed that human vessels have been operating throughout hegemony space for over a year without being detected by our surveillance networks. Their stealth capabilities appear to exceed anything in our databases." "Furthermore," added Ambassador Vorth, Our analysis indicates that humanity has been systematically gathering intelligence on all major galactic powers simultaneously. The scope and sophistication of their operations suggests a level of strategic planning that we fundamentally underestimated. But why? Demanded Ambassador Zarek. What could they possibly hope to gain? Their territory consists of a dozen star systems clustered around their homeworld. They have no strategic resources that would justify such risks. The question hung in the air unanswered until a new voice spoke from the human delegation section. Perhaps you should ask us directly. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the human podium, wearing her usual simple blue uniform and carrying herself with the same straightforward dignity that had characterized human diplomacy for decades. However, there was something different in her bearing today, a confidence that suggested she was no longer speaking from a position of weakness. "Admiral Chen," said Ambassador Thys, her voice carefully neutral, "we would welcome humanity's perspective on these concerning developments." "Thank you, Ambassador Thys. I believe it's time for some honest discussion about humanity's position in galactic affairs." Admiral Chen activated the holographic display system, projecting a three-dimensional map of known space above the council floor. The map showed political boundaries, trade routes, and territorial claims with the familiar precision of standard galactic cartography. But there were new elements that none of the delegates recognized. Red lines indicating surveillance networks, blue zones marking areas of human intelligence operations, and green dots showing the positions of vessels that supposedly didn't exist. For the past 18 months, humanity has been conducting comprehensive intelligence-gathering operations throughout known space. We have monitored your communication networks, analyzed your military capabilities, and assessed your political stability. This information has been gathered through the use of stealth technology that renders our vessels effectively invisible to your sensor systems. How? Demanded Ambassador Kresh. Through careful study of your technological principles and systematic development of countermeasures. While you were entertained by our primitive approach to galactic politics, our scientists were reverse engineering your equipment and developing capabilities specifically designed to operate in the environment you had created. You violated every territorial agreement and surveillance treaty in galactic law, accused Ambassador Vorth. We operated in the spaces between your laws, replied Admiral Chen matter-of-factly. Your treaties assume that surveillance requires detectable presence and that territorial violations can be observed and documented. Our operations left no evidence of treaty violations because they left no evidence at all. You've been spying on us for over a year, said Ambassador Thys, her voice tight with controlled anger. We've been preparing for survival in a galaxy where we were told we had no voice and no influence. Your intelligence services consider humanity a minor curiosity with primitive technology and negligible political importance. That assessment was both accurate and extremely useful for our purposes. Admiral Chen manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific star systems and trade routes that glowed with new significance. During our intelligence operations, we discovered that galactic politics are far less stable than they appear. The Velkari hegemony is experiencing significant internal pressure from member species demanding autonomy. The Arcturian Confederacy's economic expansion is creating territorial disputes with 17 different species. The Zephyrian Empire's surveillance networks have documented over 40 potential flashpoints for interspecies conflicts. Your point? Asked Ambassador Kresh. Our point is that galactic civilization is approaching a period of significant instability, and humanity's interests were not being considered in any of the contingency planning. We decided to develop capabilities that would allow us to protect ourselves regardless of how galactic politics evolved. By threatening the security of every species in known space, by demonstrating that humanity is no longer the helpless primitive species that you assumed us to be. We have capabilities that fundamentally alter the balance of power, and we're prepared to use those capabilities to protect our interests. Ambassador Thys realized that she was witnessing the most significant shift in galactic politics since the founding of the Council. Humanity had quietly evolved from a minor species into a potential superpower, and they had done so while maintaining the appearance of harmless primitives. "What do you want?" she asked. "Recognition," replied Admiral Chen simply. "We want humanity's interests to be considered in galactic politics. We want trade agreements that don't exploit our supposed technological inferiority. We want territorial rights that acknowledge our capabilities rather than our historical limitations. And we want security guarantees that protect human space from the conflicts that are coming. And if we refuse, then you'll discover that the galaxy is a much more dangerous place than you realized. Our operations over the past 18 months were intelligence-gathering exercises conducted with minimal risk to existing power structures. We have capabilities that we haven't demonstrated yet, and we'd prefer not to reveal them unless circumstances force our hand. The threat was delivered in Admiral Chen's characteristic straightforward style without bluster or elaborate intimidation tactics. It was simply a statement of fact about the consequences of different choices, which somehow made it more menacing than any dramatic declaration of war. "You're holding the entire galaxy hostage," accused Ambassador Vorth. "We're offering the galaxy an opportunity to adapt peacefully to new realities. Change is coming whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is whether that change happens through diplomatic accommodation or through the kind of demonstration that makes accommodation irrelevant." "What kind of demonstration?" asked Ambassador Kresh. Admiral Chen smiled, and for the first time in decades of diplomatic contact, the expression carried an edge that made the assembled delegates uncomfortable. "The kind that explains what happened to the Mordaxi Traders Consortium." The chamber erupted in shocked voices as delegates realized that humanity was claiming responsibility for the disappearance of an entire commercial empire. The Mordaxi had controlled trade routes throughout 3 sectors, operated hundreds of vessels, and maintained space stations that served millions of beings from dozens of species. "You destroyed them?" demanded Ambassador Thys. "We relocated them," replied Admiral Chen. Their operations had become a destabilizing influence on galactic commerce, and their criminal activities were threatening legitimate trade throughout multiple sectors. They have been transported to a secure location where they can reflect on the consequences of their choices. "Where?" "That information is classified. However, I can assure you that they are alive, healthy, and receiving accommodations appropriate to their new circumstances." The casual way that Admiral Chen described the disappearance of an entire civilization was perhaps more terrifying than open threats of destruction. Humanity had apparently developed the capability to make entire species simply vanish without leaving any trace of what had happened to them. "What guarantees do we have that humanity won't use these capabilities against other species?" asked Ambassador Zarek. "You have our word," replied Admiral Chen. "Conditional on reasonable accommodation of humanity's legitimate interests within the galactic political structure. And if we consider your demands unreasonable, then you'll need to decide whether the risks of accommodation are greater than the risks of conflict with an opponent whose capabilities you don't understand and whose intentions you can't predict." The debate that followed lasted for 17 hours and fundamentally reshaped the structure of galactic civilization. When it concluded, humanity had been granted permanent seats on the Galactic Security Council, expanded territorial rights throughout 3 sectors, and formal recognition as a major galactic power with all the privileges and responsibilities that status entailed. More importantly, every species in known space now understood that the galaxy had entered a new era. The comfortable assumptions that had governed interspecies relations for 50,000 years were obsolete, replaced by the reality that intelligence, adaptability, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most significant technological disadvantages. As Admiral Chen returned to her delegation, she reflected on the irony that humanity's greatest strength had always been underestimation by their opponents. They had been mocked for their directness, dismissed for their primitive technology, and ignored in galactic politics. But, while everyone was laughing at the obvious weaknesses, no one had noticed the less obvious strengths. Humanity had learned to hunt in the darkness between the stars, and the galaxy would never again mistake them for harmless prey. The universe had entered a new age, and its most dangerous predators were the ones who smiled politely while they explained exactly what they were going to do. The age of human ascendancy had begun, and it would be remembered as the time when the galaxy learned that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who knock politely on your door before they come inside.